would like to very much welcome everyone to the IOER-Forum in our series on reinventing sustainability. That is a topic that we chose because it is very timely to talk about the meaning of sustainability in the Anthropocene, essentially. Everybody is probably aware of the long-standing criticism and questioning of the concept of sustainability ever since it has emerged on the political stage in particular, meaning 87, 92, different dates that you can envisage in this regard. But ever since, of course, sustainability has become a very predominant paradigm for development in any political domain, cross scale, of course, from the local level to the UN, and also for science itself, of course, with the view to the emergence of sustainability science as a new inter- and transdisciplinary field of research since a couple of decades ago. I mentioned the criticism, so of course, this has been accompanied by very critical voices as well, and that refers, of course, to the manifold blurriness of the notion of sustainability, be that in terms of the underpinning ontology, be that in terms of the ethics of sustainability, and actually in most cases, actually the unspecificity of the term, which can be considered a strength as well, but oftentimes it's noted that it leaves open key decision in terms of development. And of course, these questions have become even more urgent in the context of the Anthropocene, where we are looking at a future pathway which leads us to think more about risks and negative impacts that need to be distributed among different parts, different geographies and different parts of populations across the planet, rather than any benefits or resources. And of course, that has created a new debate, and this is why we would like to delve into that, also with a specific purpose in the context of the Leibniz Association, where there is currently a development going on of an overall strategy for the association that links to sustainability. So this is the context within which we would like to bring this discussion also to fruition. Yeah, with that, I would like to very much welcome also our speaker for today, and we are very happy to have Iván González-Márquez here with us. Just a few words maybe about Iván. He's a researcher at the Centro de Investigaciones de Estudios Superiores en Antropología Social, South Pacific in Mexico. He has a background in psychology and anthropology from the Universidad Autónoma Metropolitana in Mexico City. And his main research topics for the past 15 years have been the civilizational crisis and the analysis of future scenarios, with a view to advise decision-making in a variety of contexts. So he has been working broadly as an advisor, designer, and collaborator in a variety of agroecology, permaculture, hydrological design, and biocultural conservation projects. He is also the first author of a more recent article on sustainability science, a paradigm in crisis, which I think by the title already indicates that he is a very suitable person to talk to on our topic here today. So welcome, Iván, and I would hand over to you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation, Professor Wolfram and everyone at the Institute. It's my pleasure really to be here and share some of my work with you and establish this dialogue, this important conversation that you are hosting. So hopefully this will be useful for your group. Let me share the screen. The title for this presentation is The Dark Side of Sustainability, Elements for a Deep Critique. And I will start only by acknowledging this conventional narrative we are all familiar with about the sustainability paradigm, like the first documents in which the sustainable development concept appeared in the 1980s, and then how it became the official paradigm, sustainability development, for policy, for international policy on environmental crisis, and also as a paradigm for scientific research in 1999. So we are familiar with this narrative of incremental progress, which in many times we can consider that it might be slow, but like the message is keep going, keep pushing forward. And well, this is just an amusing graph, among others, that shows a direct proportionality between these Conference of the Parts meetings from United Nations and the growing concentration of atmospheric CO2 and the climate change coming to these new extremes that we are facing now. So this is just a very direct way of showing precisely that somehow this is going in the opposite direction that it should. In a more serious tone, yes, in this paper, Sustainability Science, a Paradigm in Crisis, we tried to propose what would be like scientific or rigorous criteria to evaluate, in particular, the sustainability paradigm. So we used Thomas Kuhn's famous framework for scientific paradigms, also a discussion about policy evaluation, concluding that the main factor to consider is the problem-solving power of a paradigm. And in that sense, we can consider a lot of evidence that all the sustainability policy and all the sustainability research has been insufficient to change the trajectory in which we are in a collective level towards social and ecological collapse. So this is also reflected in something like the scientific community losing trust, or at least losing the enthusiasm in the paradigm, which we also find some evidence about this. And this is what we can, what sustains, or what we use as the basis to affirm that the paradigm is in crisis. And in relation with Thomas Kuhn's framework, what this means is that progress in science in a moment of crisis can't continue in this incremental kind of progress. We need to put back in the table for the debate the principles and the fundamentals, like the deep beliefs that are sustaining this paradigm. So this was like an introduction. Actually, we promised at the end of this paper, we promised a second part, which we haven't been able yet to publish, but the central idea of which I'm going to share right now with you, which is there is an alternative narrative. I'm going to present 3 references to this alternative narrative that can, I think, explain better that why we are going backwards in terms of the results in the global trajectory. This was the first book in which I found this alternative narrative from Beatriz Santamarina Campos. The book is Power and Ecology. It's written in Spanish. She is from Spain, and she presents a very interesting review of the first, all the countercultural movements in the 60s, the student protests, civil rights movements, anti-war movements, anti-colonial, feminist, environmentalist. All this is what I'm talking about, like a radical critique to some central aspects of the economic system, in particular, infinite growth, but also modernity, development, progress, reason, Western superiority, anthropocentrism, individualism, consumerism, the commodification of nature, and in general, the idea of progress as dominion over nature. So these were all ideas that were being discussed or towards which dissent was expressed in this moment of a lot of social movements, and also a series of critical bestsellers like Rachel Carson's famous Silent Spring, or others from Barry Commoner, Paul Ehrlich, in this in the 60s, that led to the massive demonstrations like the Earth Day in 1970, and also with more of a scientific tone and these famous computer models, the famous book Limits to Growth in 1972, which originally was directing this analysis towards the idea that we should stop growth. We should aim for a zero growth, like the goal, not to really go to the root of the problem. So Beatriz Santamarina is very good. She gives a lot of detail to present how the environmental rhetoric was an international battlefield in those years. She gives a lot of space to analyze the political tensions throughout different conferences and international gatherings between developed countries and developing countries, the global north and south, or center and periphery. And what this alternative narrative is a narrative of an institutional effort to channel this social critique, social movement, critical energy into an innocuous framing that won't go directly against the core of the system, which is economic growth. So she documents a lot of discussions where ecocentric or biocentric positions were being proposed, and how we come back. We have like the anthropocentric view is reestablished in these discussions, and how the Brundtland report in particular establishes this relationship between poverty and environmental degradation. So to reach the conclusion that we need growth, we need vigorous growth to solve even the ecological problems, the environmental problems, which is in the basis of the sustainable development idea, and continues to our days with this decoupling vision. So this is another reference. The next one that I found from Guillermo Aragon, which is a Mexican colleague, and in a congress where we were presenting together. Yeah, he talked about this veto from Henry Kissinger to the Cocoyoc Declaration, who was the result of this international seminary on environmental degradation from United Nations that took place here in Mexico, in the city of Cuernavaca, and which the document resulting from this seminary talks about eco-development. And afterwards, I found other references of this telegram sent from from Henry Kissinger as State Secretary of the United States to the president of the United Nations Environmental Program to block the use of this concept. And here is just a quote. In the face of opposition and pressure from the United States government, the new term sustainable development was coined, a term which economists could accept easily as it was similar to self-sustained growth, since the concept of eco-development would require rich countries to change their economic growth model and subordinate it to the limits to growth defined by the Club of Rome, something that was unacceptable for the owners of the capital. This is a quote from Guillermo Aragon. And this is also a very important piece of information that is also presented in this other paper, In Search of Lost Time, The Rise and Fall of Limits to Growth in International Sustainability Policy, by Eric Gomez-Baguetun and Jose Manuel Naredo, in which they analyze three major changes in international sustainability discourse, from a notion of growth versus the environment to a notion of growth for the environment, from direct public regulation to market-based instruments, and from a political discussion to a technocratic discourse. So they say that the attempts to address the conflict between growth and environment have pulled back severely since the 1970s. So this is the alternative narrative I'm wanting to share with you. A radical critique vetoes, and that's why to explain this movement actually going backwards. So this is also another reference that I find relevant. In the early 80s, this book that should be more widely known, Overshoot by William R. Catton, who was very clear that our problem is not climate change. Climate change is an effect, is a symptom of the real problem, which is overshoot. So, of course, growth is incompatible with a finite planet. Decoupling is not supported by evidence. Now, we have already surpassed the 1.5 degrees Celsius in the Paris Agreement. We are seeing all these tipping points activating planetary boundaries surpassed. So we can't keep ignoring, because my feeling is that when we only say sustainability is another step in this direction of like invisibilizing or ignoring the uncomfortable part of development growth. So we can't keep ignoring this. And actually, yes, I just wanted like to honor a deep feeling of grief that many of us are feeling 50 years later, observing, contemplating what was possible to do back then when the original Limits to Growth report was launched. And now, in this moment where we are seeing irreversible climate change and runaway climate change. So maybe for some of you, this will sound like another conspiracy theory, and we have competing alternatives. There are also some people thinking that all climate change is a hoax, that is an attempt to limit our personal freedoms or even the right of poor people or developing countries to actually benefit from the positive aspects of development. So there are also those kind of theories. And how could we decide if we could only have some evidence to decide? So I think that the evidence is actually all around us, and this is what makes me talk about the dark side of sustainability paradigm. How this paradigm has allowed the continuation of this collective trajectory in which one of the main results that we are seeing is the progressive and accelerating concentration of global wealth. So this is a graph from Visual Capitalist in data from 2022, where 1% of the population concentrates 45.8% of global wealth, and the poorest 52.5% of population survives with 1.2% of the global wealth. And this also, I could show graphs where the CO2 emissions, the energy consumption, the natural resource consumption, the all kinds of production of residues is also correlated with wealth. So this is not a failure of the system. The system is designed for this. And actually, that is why this institutional attempt to keep the system working. And actually, it's working well in that sense. So why could this, if you agree, like this big conspiration could be so successful? So, of course, this is a very complex issue that has many aspects, but I think one important aspect is the so-called confirmation bias, where we unconsciously select the observations that confirms our previous beliefs. And what are our previous beliefs? Well, this narrative of progress deeply ingrained in most of the societies now in the globally, which is a narrative in which we as humans actually is like if our essence, what constitutes like our deeper nature is precisely to this ability of breaking the limits of nature, breaking like the chains of natural law, becoming free, and not only free, but also becoming masters of nature through science, through technology, through understanding of the natural laws, and to use them at our service, like to instrumentalize nature in the for the goals of our human industrial modern civilization. So, of course, this is a big topic that I won't be able to address very with much depth today, but one very important reference for me in this effort to understand is this book, The Patterning Instinct by Jeremy Lent, which presents, yes, a history of worldviews from the animistic worldviews that were common in the more than the 95% of our species history. Of course, Homo sapiens, a social species, needs to coordinate behavior, and for this, the communication is the way of doing it. So a shared understanding of the world is natural for human groups, but something different happens when we are talking about what we call civilizations. So this is a thing that I have worked from the perspective of political anthropology. No? So how can we define precisely what is a civilization? So I will say these hierarchical, patriarchal, militaristic, expansionary social structures, many times said like the complex societies, which have this structure of relationships, which is also a spatial structure from between centers dominating a periphery, like centers, like many times is a different culture, like in colonialism, a different culture that has power over smaller or more simpler societies that are under a territory of influence and sustained by the use of violence and also by ideology or religion worldview. This relation, this asymmetric relation, this of power between the center and the periphery, which allows what I believe to be the central dynamic of civilizations, which is a feedback loop between accumulation of resources in the center, which allows a new wave of expansion, capturing more territory under the influence of this center, and then being able to accumulate more resources to then be able to conquest more territory. No, so this feedback loop actually, which is under the light of like the civilizationary project, is success, but it's actually a tendency. Is also what becomes like an addiction to growth, an addiction to this expansionist dynamic, and ultimately leads to a tendency to collapse. So there are also a lot of studies of many civilizations collapsing. This is only one reference, which calculated an average lifespan of civilizations as 336 years in average before it collapses, not considering all these ancient civilizations. So it's a common pattern that follows what I believe to be like the core dynamic or the essential features of this kind of social structures. So the structure of domination, which is the origin of what we now call structural violence, is these symbolic divides that trace like the axis for oppression. No, here I think that the human nature divide, the traced over the like the relationship between subject and object. No, the human being the only agent in a machine-like nature is also like a model, like a paradigm to in which all these other dualities or relationships are like modeled. No, the mind-body relationship between reason and emotion, between male and female, urban, rural, center, periphery, north, south, Western or non-Western or indigenous, also class relationships, no, like, and of course the anthropocentric relationship to the rest of the natural world. So it's intertwined the use of violence and the ideology that legitimizes this violence, and this is like an aspect that we can well, actually in my PhD thesis some years ago, I was like trying to follow the development of or the evolution of different worldviews, but that throughout different changes, they still preserve or they need the continuation of these symbolic divides for oppression, because this is the structure that sustains the functioning of this kind of society, whose goal is to accumulate wealth, power, and like centralize the decision making. Of course, I want to make here a cautionary parenthesis, and I like very much the positioning of Seila bin Habib in this book, where she says that every time that we try to define like the core ideas or some like the essence of a culture, this will be very controversial and can be disputed. This can be contested, because every culture is a multiplicity of voices, a multiplicity of narratives, but inside the a social group, a culture, of course, there are power imbalances that make that some narratives, some voices, some forms of describing the world and ourselves, our own culture, will be, of course, more central, will be given a position of power, and others will be marginalized, will be segregated, or even persecuted and eliminated. No? So she talks about, she presents a view of culture like in terms of radical hybridization, also, of course, considering all the dialogues and exchanges between social groups and everything, which reminds me and also is compatible with a psychological notion of ambivalence, in which even one person is not like a monolithic way of seeing the world or of thinking, or we also have like internally different voices, and we also have internally like power relationships between these voices. So some of them will be marginalized and some of them will be given like a more central position. So this is my from where I am standing. Of course, here I can only give some very broad traces of the kind of analysis that I've been working on. But I think that more than a crisis of paradigm, we are talking about something much deeper. We are talking of a crisis of worldview. In this paper that that I was talking about in the first slides, we conclude that as long as sustainability science or the sustainability paradigm keeps treating nature as an object, as a machinery to control, as long as we are trying to adjust nature, the natural world, to our human infinite growth project, and surpassing every biophysical limit, we are doomed to fail. So what is the difference between a paradigm and a worldview? Here, it's useful for me to put side by side the sociology of science of Thomas Kuhn and this sociology of knowledge of Peter Berger and Thomas Luckmann, who they both analyze with a lot of detail the power dynamics inside a community that crystallizes some ideas that might become kind of dogmas for a particular group. And of course, this in the case of this, the social construction of reality, they are talking about the construction of worldviews, and in this sense, like religions or ideology, but with the difference that these are more in like a level which is not empirically testable, which is more like in a mythological level, and which is more, we choose more in terms of the narratives that give sense to our lives, and like the emotional and affective reaction that we have to this meaning that worldview, how it frames our efforts in daily life. But they are very clear in showing all the power dynamics, because the status quo, the positions of authority and everything are sustained by these ideologies. So in this kind of complex societies, civilizations, hierarchical structures, domination structures, then alternative worldviews or dissenting narratives, dissenting voices can be persecuted and tried to be eliminated. So what should we do? I'm almost reaching the conclusions. Sorry, this slide I was finishing just some minutes ago. But what should we go? Some people would think, well, then we must abandon our own culture. And actually, many people, of course, there are all these anthropological studies of like the New Age spirituality, and many ways in which we actually see people questioning their narratives of their own culture and finding more meaning in the narratives of other cultures. So this is something that happens, but we can't say we would be repeating the same mistake if we were imposing a new paradigm, trying to define the new paradigm or the new worldview that now we are going to like I'm saying here like a new evangelization of Mother Earth, as it were. No, this would be repeating the same mistake of the process that I've been trying to show here. And some people are, I think, I want to validate the fears of some people that are afraid that a new, like dogma, environmental agenda or regime will be imposed throughout the world, limiting and like an eco-fascist dictatorship or something like that. Of course, I mean, I want to validate those fears because we are used to this kind of process. Nevertheless, I think that in the context of the inevitable energy decline, of being that the peak oil is now behind us, the energy transition will not substitute in a way that we can continue growing or we can continue the levels of consumption that we have now. So we are in a process of energy decline, which is one of the central components of the civilization crisis. So I really think that the age of colonialism has ended, even if people are actually going to try to impose a new paradigm or a new global worldview. There won't be fuel to do that, to impose, to sustain this kind of violence, or even the media. I think that we are reaching the points of peak communication, peak technology, peak everything, as some people say. So I think we should not be thinking about what is the next global paradigm or how to define the next global worldview. So it's more of a step back. And here I agree with all these, a lot of people working in the line of the decolonization, not only of space, of territories, but the decolonization of minds. And of course, all the work that is being done, particularly in Latin America and here in Mexico, all the discussion of defending the pluriverse, like the plurality of worldviews as a political position, embracing radical plurality, and considering that we can agree on practical issues, respecting the freedom of plural beliefs. So, what are a very practical issue that I think that we should agree? Yes, I think we must change the global goal, the goal of the economic system from accumulation to an economy of care, as some ecofeminist scholars are saying. An economy whose main goal is to sustain the life support systems and the web of life in the planet, not only human. So it's to redirect the goal of society instead of these hierarchies of domination and these divides, symbolic divides of oppression. We need a view of care that is, how do you say, of radical inclusiveness. We must support worldviews of radical inclusiveness. And here I agree with something that I've heard from Joanna Macy, who makes a brief panoramic overview of a lot of spiritual traditions and non-spiritual, also like atheist, scientific people, that each one of them are working on a deep questioning of their own tradition. So it's not about abandoning your culture, but of questioning these internal polyphony of voices in our own culture, questioning the power relationships between these voices, because in every culture, in every tradition, there are multiple sub branches of these traditions, and we can find elements, we can find traditions inside that are also questioning and also trying to push the worldview towards, for example, recovering the sacrality of nature, which doesn't mean necessarily a spiritual view. I mean, it can be, you can, even in an atheist, materialistic worldview, you can treat some elements that sustain your own life and the life of the web of life as sacred, because life depends on it. So we can recover this character of sacrality. And of course, there's so many traditions, scientific and religious and ideologic, that put the emphasis on cooperation, symbiosis, synergy. There are many names for it. And not only to find value, like inherent value in all these marginalized parts of the world, no? Especially like in the natural world, in the non-human world, is not only to find value, inherent value in them, but also to recognize the agency, to recognize that, for example, there are some territory ordainments that I've heard of, in which people are considering that, like, what is the desire or the wish or the dream of a river? What is the like the agency of the river? What does the river says? And like to take in account his or her vote in the order in the decisions that we are basing our ordering of space and of social structures. So how can we consider these elements of nature, these non-human agents in the decision making towards spatial design? So this is my last slide. I'm just gonna mention these also wide discussions, but in which I am an advocate of the validity of plural epistemologies in the sense of science, the building of knowledge. I'm not a radical relativist in the sense of every belief is the same and there is not a special status of knowledge against opinion or something like that. There are important criteria in a community that need to be covered in order to valid knowledge to be developed, but this can be made in a plurality of ontologies or worldviews. It's not that the materialist, atheist, modern worldview is the only worldview where you can do science, and there are many arguments to show this. Also, there is this big discussion on evidence-based discussion. For example, all the work of Elinor Ostrom and many. I like very much also all what Elena Norberg is talking about, the local futures and everything. So the validity of local governance, decentralized governance, which goes, in my view, hand in hand with this pluriverse of epistemologies. And in terms of space, how can we focus ourselves instead of a global agenda of global sustainability in bioregional resilience, in the regeneration of social and ecological metabolisms, how energy and materials flow in the bioregional ecosystems, and how can we reintegrate our social buildings, our social structures in these regenerative metabolisms, bioregional metabolisms. So, of course, this is another big area of research, discussion, a lot of interesting experiences around the world that I just wanted to mention. And with this, I would like to finish for now. Only I know for some of you, some of the things that I've said might be like common sense. For some of you, maybe some wild claims, but I try to be brief and in order to have a discussion in whatever aspect that you find interesting or that you don't agree. I'm very welcome to hear you and maybe give some more arguments on why I'm saying these things. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ivan, for the very nice contribution.